Hello, everybody. Hello, Trailblazers. I'm glad you've come. On behalf of the TRIA Germany admin group, welcome to today's Salesforce ISV Landscape session, in which we explore solutions from third parties in the Salesforce ecosystem. My name is Rene. I'm the TRIA user group leader, and I'll be your co-host for today. My co-host from Frankfurt has not yet arrived.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
So my name's Sarah Henderson. I'm one of the co-leaders of the Frankfurt user community group, and very pleasure to be invited along, Renee. Thank you. And hopefully there's a few of our team joining as well.
Yeah, will you continue the intro?
So I'd like to introduce you all to Martin or Martin?
Martijn.
Martijn. So he's our speaker from the ISV partner Sliced Bread, and he's going to present their Sliced Bread ETL app for large data processing on Salesforce. So the session's going to have three parts: the introduction, a demo, and some question and answers afterwards. Do you want questions in between, or would you prefer to have them at the end of the presentation?
They can be in between. That's perfectly fine.
Okay. Then, and additionally, we have Jonas, and you are going to moderate any questions if people are popping them in the chat, I think, if I'm right. Is that correct, Rene?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get started then. I'll hand over to you, Martijn.
Perfect. Jonas, let me know if there are any questions, because while I'm doing a demo or doing a presentation, I won't be able to see the chat. So please interrupt me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. So first of all, thanks for having me. Germany is always a nice place for me, because I finally have an audience that is able to pronounce my last name correctly. So without further ado, let me share my screen. I have a small presentation, but let's dive into the actual work. But first we need to do the introduction. Let me see, share screen, share the window. Here we go. Is everybody able to see my screen? Present from the beginning, present the view, current screen only, start.
Yeah, we're seeing the full PowerPoint. Now
Here
we
we
see
go.
the presentation.
Yeah, for some reason Google doesn't remember my settings. So this is just the introduction slide. Again, thanks for having me. Who am I? My name is Martijn. I'm the CEO of Sliced Bread, the ETL on Salesforce. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2011. Basically worked my way up from developer all the way up to architect, and then I started freelancing in 2020 while building my own ISV company. During that time, I met AJ, my current business partner, and long story short, Sliced Bread was born. And officially since March last year, we went public. We've been building the app, I think, for about 3-4 years now, because a lot of work has gone into it. But publicly available since March last year. Other things I do, I'm also a Salesforce user group co-leader in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And I've had the honor of being a Salesforce MVP for 3 years. So that's a little bit about me. But let's talk about why we built Sliced Bread, because I think that is a story that should resonate with all the admins out there. Like I said, I'm in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2011. And in all those years, I've seen all types of orgs, from greenfield implementations to orgs that have been around for 10 years. As a developer and as an architect, we ran into multiple situations where we had to handle large amounts of data. And long story short, it could be better. It could be done better on Salesforce. So what are the typical use cases that we ran into? Of course, we have data import or mass data uploads, data cleansing on large scale, mass data updates. For example, just recently, I had a customer that had a Chamber of Commerce field on their account object. And then they installed an app from the AppExchange to actually pull data from the Chamber of Commerce and keep their data into sync with the original source. But that package had its own Chamber of Commerce field. So they had to copy over all their values into the package field. But they had over 250,000 accounts. So how are you going to do that? Another one is sandbox seeding. Of course, full copy is not an issue, but if you have a developer org, you want to automate or ideally, in an easy way, get the right data in there. Data migrations, either between Salesforce orgs or just in general, but also data archiving and exporting data, because you don't always want to export just the object data, but you want to combine data and create an export that is in the correct format. And what are the challenges there? So when you import data and you use data loader, it will pump your data into Salesforce. But handling multi-object hierarchies is difficult and often time-consuming. I'll get back to that one. Because you cannot insert accounts with contacts and cases, for example, in one go. Error handling, same thing. Some records will succeed, some will fail. How do you handle the failures? Usually you have to manually manipulate your source data. And there's no audit trail, so you don't even see what actually happened. And this is a discussion where we ran into with one of the projects I did when I worked at a consulting company. We did a data migration, and a few weeks later, we got into a discussion on why was this data loaded in this way, because it's not correct. Well, we didn't load the data in that way, but we had no proof other than our source files. There was no field level history. So what happened? Well, after a few weeks of digging, it turns out there was an integration that did a few updates. But had we had an audit trail, we wouldn't have had that discussion. And also as a developer, I've seen so many times where I got a request to create a batch job for a one-off use. And, you know, it works, of course. Developers can build anything. But it's just a shame that you have to go through the entire development test, user acceptance, and all the way up to production for something that you use once and then have to clean up afterwards. So in general, our vision is that we believe that working with large data sets on Salesforce, it should be as easy and safe as working with just a few records. And I just want to highlight the Salesforce Ben admin survey results. They came in last week or so. And there was I'm not going to go through all of them, but actually really look at this report because there's a lot of interesting information in there. But I want to highlight one thing, and that's this slide. And if we look at the responses there, the most time-consuming tasks on number 4, data import integration, and on number 6, data backup and archival. So this is not recovery, but actually archiving. So more than 1 in 4 Salesforce admins think it's the most time-consuming task to just do data import. That's why we build it. So that's about our why. How do we do it? How do we get our application to you? Simple, AppExchange package. And we built that native on Salesforce for a lot of reasons. Most ETLs live outside of Salesforce. So what they do is they pull data out of Salesforce, do the transformations, and then get the results back in. We think it should belong on Salesforce. And why is that? Because your data transformation should be done in Salesforce and not outside of Salesforce. In Excel, for example, those manual data manipulations, you don't want that. Also, we believe that admins shouldn't have to learn another skill. You want to leverage your existing skills. You know Salesforce, you know Flow. You just want to apply that knowledge to large data sets. Plus, if you do it externally, besides from all the data privacy issues there might be, it's really hard to validate or enrich data with against existing data in your org. And what do we actually do? So what is the end result? Well, first let me go back. Why is it called sliced bread? And that is because Salesforce, it's really hard to handle large data sets. So we came up with a bread as your data set. And the first thing we do is we slice that into small pieces, the slices, hence sliced bread. But what do you do with those slices? Those slices are small amounts of data that Salesforce can actually process. But you want to add your own business logic to it. There's validations, there's queries, there's a lot of things you want to do with it. And we call that a recipe. So we have import recipes where you import data from outside of Salesforce. We support CSV, Excel, JSON, and XML formats. It can be from a file upload. It can come in via email or even via external systems like FTP or other Salesforce orgs. We have data recipes that allow you to do bulk data updates. So these run on the data in Salesforce. Aggregate data, but also generate data, because we found that you don't always need a data source and do your transformations there. You can just start with empty and just generate data. But then in the end, when you've done all your transformations, you need to do something with that data. So you can load it into Salesforce. And of course, we support multi-object hierarchies. And we can create, update, and delete data. But we can also export data to CSV, Excel, and XML in any format you like. Any questions so far? Otherwise, I'll jump into the demo.
There are no questions so far, so please continue.
Okay. So first thing you do when you want to install Sliced Bread, of course, you go to the AppExchange. We do have a nice listing. You can get it now, or contact me, and I'll get you a nice price. And I do have one link externally that I need to copy paste. So this is how do you install it. It's very simple. You get it from the AppExchange, and your normal package installation is here. I do have an org where it is installed, so if this takes too long, we'll just jump over. But it shouldn't take that long. This is the same org. As you can see, there were no packages installed. This is a really empty org. I'm going to give it a few more seconds, and otherwise we'll revisit that later. So let me dive into the demo scenario. We are currently part of a user group meeting. And whenever you want to be part of a user group meeting, you have to RSVP for a user group meeting. And when you do that, we can capture your data. So that's what we do. And that's what we did, because we're going to spam you with a lot of newsletters and upcoming meetings. And we've saved that data in a CSV file. But as you can see, some of them are duplicates in here, because they registered for both the Frankfurt user group, but also for the Trier Ohana group. And if you let users enter their own data, things are going to be missing. So sometimes we miss first names or last names, or everything is in upper letters, or everything is in lower letters, or we have data we don't want to import because I'm in here as well. And I believe Renee is in here as well. So this is data we want to exclude. We don't even want to import it. And normally, if you use data loader, you have to go through this file and, get rid of Renee, get rid of me, and prepare everything and make sure it's in the perfect format, and then upload it into Salesforce. And there's a better way. So what we want to do is we want to, and let me jump immediately into Salesforce. So we have our campaign. This is our meeting for today. And I already tried to do this via data loader, but of course this went horribly wrong, because I only have 217 contacts in my campaign, while I have over 500 in my Excel file. And the status is all set to send, but we know you are here, so you responded. So that's something we need to fix. And together we're going to build a recipe to do that. So we need to first check if the contacts already exist. And if they exist, are they also a campaign member? And if they don't exist or they're not a campaign member, we need to create that data. Sounds simple, right? In the meantime, let's see. Installation is complete. So quickly back to the installation. Once it's installed, all you need to do is go to the permission sets and assign yourself a single Sliced Bread admin permission set, and you're ready to go. That's the entire installation. So I did a few preparations, of course. So here we go. This is Sliced Bread. Here we have our breads, our data sets, slices, and recipes. I'm going to forget recipe jobs for now. And we are going to create a new recipe using our CSV import. So here you have all the recipe types that I just mentioned. This is a CSV import. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to ask you for your CSV file. We have that here. And when you upload it, we are immediately going to analyze that for you. So we see the columns. We identify the columns from the CSV, the first row values, because based on these values, we can determine a data type. Always review this because it might not always be perfectly identified. For example, a phone number, if the first row only contains numbers, this will be a number field, but other phone numbers might contain a plus with a country code. So you want to import that as text. And we also have suggestions for our virtual fields. Virtual fields are variables, only our version of it. So when we are going to process this CSV file, basically what Sliced Bread will do is it will take the value from the first name and save that value in this field. That's the extraction part. Well, we don't need the actual user group and we don't need a meeting date for now, so we can exclude those. And when we create our recipe, we come into our recipe builder, and this should look familiar if you've ever used an app builder or any other of the other Salesforce tools, because we try to mimic the Salesforce UI as much as possible. Hence, you don't need to learn new skills. Of course, you need to know how Sliced Bread works, but everything should look and feel familiar. What happens here? Here we have our phases that a record goes through whenever you process this recipe. So the first thing is this slicing part. We take the entire CSV file, we're going to slice that into small pieces. That results in raw data. And from that raw data, we're going to extract the values that we just defined in our wizard. So once that is done, we can start transforming data. And as we've seen here, there are a few things we need to take care of. And the first thing I always advise is start with your validations. So the first thing is, let's get rid of Renee and me. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to copy the domain because anything with trailblazercommunitygroupleader.com we don't want to import. We have a validate rule. So here we go. That's the first thing we're going to do. We have a formula builder. And this is the same formula builder as you know from Salesforce, with a few extra formulas that we build ourselves. And in this case, I want to use the contains formula, and we can just drag drop it into here. So if the email field contains the text at trailblazercommunitygroupleader.com, then we are going to discard that slice, that record from the CSV. We're not going to import it. We're not even going to process it. And we can give an error message there and say is user group leader. And because you really want to test whatever you're building before you run it, so we have a playground. So if I have an email address, martijn@gmail.com, and I say try it out, then we have no output because it passes. But if we make that at trailblazercommunitygroupleader.com, then this is discarded. So this logic seems to work. First step is get rid of Renee and me. That means that we only have records left that we actually want to process. Well, that's not entirely true. If there are no email addresses, we cannot spam you. So basically, we want to do another validation. Here we go. Because is blank, aka if there is no email address, we're going to discard those as well, but with a different message. No email address provided. That already cleans up our CSV. What's next? We have data of people without last names. We need a last name because it's a required field on contact. But I also see that I can get that last name from our email address. So I'm not going to let that fail. I'm going to make sure that we are able to handle those errors. There are no other situations to cover here. So first thing we do now is see if these contacts already exist. And we can use a query for that. So we can query the data in our Salesforce org, and in this case, the contact object. And this is just a query. So select select the fields that you need, and give any conditions where you want to base your selection on. So we want to save this contact ID, and this contact ID, well, is already automatically identified as a lookup to the contact, and I don't need the ID, but we're going to save that ID in our output field contact. And since email address is pretty unique in our system, we are going to check if the email field from the contact, which is here, so these are all the fields from the contact, equals the value in our CSV file that we extracted from the CSV file. Now, there are a few validations that you can immediately do. If there is no email, you can let it fail. Well, we already did a validation on the email. So in that case, this will never occur. It will never be blank because we've already took care of that situation. So it doesn't really matter what we do here. This will never be the case. But for example, you could skip this rule or actually check for an empty value. Sometimes that's what you want to do. But there are also output validations. So what if this query does not give us a record? We don't want to let it fail. We just want to allow it to continue and go to the next step, because if there is no contact, we want to create one. So that's the first step that we do. We try to find that contact. But we also need to find a campaign member. But for a campaign member, we need a campaign. And since our CSV is always specific to a certain campaign, we can create a parameter on recipe level. And if we do that, it's just a virtual field. It's just a parameter. But every time you run this recipe, you need to fill this value in order for the recipe to start. Sorry, it's not campaign member, it's campaign, of course. So we're going to need a campaign. Whenever we run this recipe, provide a campaign to us. Now we have that field as well. And now we can do a query on the campaign member object. And we want to save the campaign member ID. So that will be a lookup to campaign member, of course. And how do we find that campaign member? Well, based on the campaign and the contact, if we found it. So the contact ID must match the contact we found, and the campaign ID, yeah, here we go, must match the campaign that was provided to us. If contact might be empty, because that query might not have resulted in a contact. And if that is the case, we're just going to skip this rule. We don't want to execute this. But if there's no campaign, which will never happen because it's a required field, we'll let it fail. Then we have output validations. What if we don't have a campaign member found? Well, we're going to allow that because we'll create that campaign member later on. Here we go. Next. I forgot one thing. Rebecca is in here twice. So we can already deduplicate our data set from within Sliced Bread while we do our transformations, because we have a deduplicate rule. And this basically means that the data set provided, in this case, our CSV file, deduplicate that on this key, in this case, the email address. So if the first time we run into an email address, we're going to process that. If we run into the same email address again, we're going to discard it because we don't need that. We only need the data once. So let's get rid of the duplicates. And then there was one other thing. We have capital letters, and I'm sure I saw a few lower letters as well somewhere. Yeah, here, Elliot. But we want to sanitize that data, and we want to have nice data in our database. So we can create another formula. And whatever comes out of that formula, we're going to save that value in our first name field. And in this case, we have a function called proper. And what this will do is this will make sure that every first letter of every word is capitalized. And in this case, we want to create a proper first name. So if I create Renee, for example, that will turn out to be Renee. Or Renee, because you have users that find these things funny to do, it will still turn out to be a normal name. So we'll do that for first name, and let's also do that for last name. We create a field where we want to save that last name, and we're going to proper the value of our CSV extracted last name. Check. Works. Okay. Now, there's one very important rule.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we have a question. So Anshul asks, what if I have my name not correct the first time and I add a second entry which will stay?
There are a lot of ways to do that. It's not part of this demo. But what you can do is just get rid of the duplicate rule here. Then you just delete this. And what you could do is, because the first time the first record that is processed, let's say you only have your initials, then a contact will be created with your initials. What we can do is check if we find that contact. Currently, we're only saving the contact ID, of course, but we can also save more fields. So what we can do is we can get the first name and the last name from the database. Where's last name? Here we go. Save that in other virtual fields. Let's call first name existing contact, last name existing contact, and then start doing comparison. So if the existing contact has a shorter name, let's say the initials, then the contact we are currently, or the last name that we're currently getting, will take that value. So there are many ways to do that. But given the time that we have, I'd love to show you, but I won't be able to finish the rest of the demo. But yeah, it requires a little bit more logic. So let me quickly put this back at the end. Create. Other questions?
Yes, here's a follow-up question. What does proper do actually?
What does what do? Sorry.
Proper.
Proper. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So it creates a proper name. So what it will do is it will capitalize the first letter of each word. So if I say Ohana Trier is awesome, and I throw it through my proper, then the first letter of each word will be capitalized. So this is a proper sentence. This is somebody screaming on social media. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say.
So it's a way to sanitize your data and make sure that you get some meaningful data in your org instead of whatever users entered in a form. So these are just the transformations, but we still need to load that data into Salesforce. So the first thing we want to do is we want to use the create record. And what are we going to create? A contact. And we already have this contact field. So this will contain the ID. And we want to save our proper first name, our proper last name, and the email from the CSV into the corresponding fields on the contact. Email goes here. And then we have first name here. Create. Oh, and now we come into a very important rule of Sliced Bread, and that is where our virtual fields work a little bit different than, let's say, a variable in flow. If you have a variable in flow, you can override the data. If it's a number, you can add more numbers to it. In Sliced Bread, if you have it populated once, that's it. And that sounds counterintuitive, but it allows us to do things like this. Since this is all the same field, contact, contact, and contact, if we find a contact from our query, then this one is already populated. Create contact is trying to do the same thing. It's trying to create a contact and populate this field. But this field is already populated because we found the contact here. So if it is already populated, this rule will be skipped. And that means that we can use existing data from the org instead of creating duplicates. Same goes for this one. If we do not find a record here, as you can see, it's used as a parameter, so it's a mandatory field. If it's not populated, then this will skip. So we are going to do the same for our campaign member. We have an existing field that might contain a value already. And if it contains a value, this create action will be skipped. But we still have that ID in here, so we can still use it for further processing. Let's see, what do we need for a campaign member? We need a campaign and a contact. And well, we saw here that the status is sent for everyone. So let's do that here as well. You can use a pick list value. Here we go. Create. So let me go through this again. If we find a contact, then this field will already be populated, which means this rule will be skipped. But the ID that we captured here will still be used here to create a campaign member. Does that make sense? There's one last step to do, and that is to update our campaign member. Whether we found it or just created it doesn't really matter. But we want to set status to responded because you are all here. And we need to correct the existing data in our org because this is all set to send. Hopefully I covered everything. And hopefully we'll run into some errors. So import meeting attendees. This will be our recipe. So every time, oh, it already exists. Oh. Number 2. So every time Rene has a meeting and gets the CSV file, he can use this recipe to get all the data of the attendees in the system. I forgot to activate it. Sorry. Activate. And now we can run it. So on the home page, we have run a recipe, import meeting attendees, the one we just created. And here's our recipe field, the campaign field. Of course, we're going to select today's meeting. And you can specify a name for this bread. But the default usually is perfect. And then what do we need? We need the CSV file. And once we have that, we can start the process by hitting Start Slicing. And what happens now is we take that bread that was created. The bread is just a record in Salesforce. And we take the file that is attached to it. And we're going to slice that into small records that Salesforce can process, slices. As you can see, there are 503 slices in our CSV file. Let me quickly check. Did we do that correctly? Here we go. 504 here, but there's one header row, so that's correct. And we've had 9 records being discarded. So if you want to know why they are discarded, we can just click on this 9 and we'll create a nice report for you. Yeah, dismiss. So what we see here, oh, this is a nice one. This was discarded because it's duplicate. Rebecca was in our file twice. Oh, sorry, wrong window. All the way to the top. This is Rebecca. She's in here twice, and we got rid of her once. So that's the deduplication rule working for you. We have a few that have no email address, and we have 2 user group leaders. So this makes sense. Saves us a lot of manual work every time we get a new CSV. No, don't go to the builder. Go home. And then now it says ready to load. We actually stopped the process. And why did we do that? Because that's the thing with data loader. You prepare your CSV and you say upload, and there it goes into Salesforce. And halfway through that load, you think, oh my God, I missed something. And you have to do it all over again. So what we allow you to do is view a load plan to see what happened and what will happen. And this is just an overview of all the slices. And what we see here is this slice has 3 DML statements. And if we go down a bit, we have 2 DML statements. And if we go down a bit, we have 1 DML statement. So these are basically the 3 situations that are covered in our recipe. So let me open those slices. Let me find one with 2 as well. Here we go. Doesn't really matter who. Let's start with coal. So there's a lot going on here. But let's look at our history. So this is our audit trail. And this is worth its weight in gold. So here we see the values that were extracted from our CSV line into our virtual fields. We checked if it was a user group leader. That wasn't the case. We checked if there was no email address provided. Also wasn't the case. We tried to find the contact, and we found one. We tried to find the campaign member, and it found one. We calculated the first name and the last name, and we checked if it was a duplicate. But since we found a contact and a campaign member, all we need to do is 1 DML statement is to update that campaign member to the status responded. So only this action will be in your load plan. This is what's actually going to happen. And as you can see, we're using the contact that was found here. By the way, this all is click through, so you can jump immediately to your data. And what we see is here we have Cole. He is a campaign member, and the status is set to send. So when we go back to this slice, what we can do is just run this individual record to see if everything goes wrong. For example, we can run into a validation rule or into some automation error or whatever. And you want to see that and know that on individual basis before you actually load 10, 20,000, 30,000 records. Our loading is also added to our history. So here you see create contact, we skip that. Create campaign member, we skip that because we already had those values. And here we updated call phone, status field is set to responded. Well, let's see if that actually worked. Here we go, set to responded. And if we now go to our campaign, which is now here, we had 0 responses. And if we refresh this one, now we have 1 response. So everything looks fine. So that's call. That's the situation call. Then we have Miles. And we did find Miles as a contact, but not as a campaign member. So that's why we're going to create one. We're going to link Miles to our campaign and then update the campaign to responded. Let's check if that situation works. Well, it seemed to have worked. Quick check on our campaign. 218, so this is 1 up and 2 responses. Looks good. And now we have someone where we didn't find anything. So we're going to create a contact and we're going to create an updated campaign member. And I now see I actually have a wrong example. Here we go. Let's try someone else. Load plan. Go. We have a new contact, a new campaign member, and it's updated. Quick check. Here we go. 219 and 3 responses. So now basically I've covered every situation that we have in our data set. I feel confident. So what we can do now, this one, is run the entire recipe. Let's just load it. We still have 491 to go. So go. And since it actually runs on Salesforce, we are part of the Salesforce queue. So it might take a while for it to start. That's the Salesforce server handling it. But this went pretty fast. But we do have 6 errors. And instead of having to go back into our CSV, our source file, and having to, manually adjust things, we can just go into this slice and go to the troubleshoot tab. So what went wrong? We're missing a required field. Last name. Well, we can get that last name from the email address. So we can edit the fields here. I can just save this last name here. Save. And that is added to our audit trail. So the old value, let me go to the full one because there's some extra information. You can see that I did this on this date, on this time. It was a manual edit. There was no last name. Now there is one. And if we process it now, then we can actually create a contact. And everything is okay. So you don't need to go back into your source files, change everything, and then upload it again. You can just do that right from within Salesforce. There's another situation because we also have invalid email addresses. How is that possible? Well, typos, or well, we can actually see that this is not a valid email address. But let's take an educated guess and add .com and still process it. Here we go. We could do the same for all the other ones, but given the time that we have, I'm just going to discard these ones. So get rid of all the failures. And in the end, we have 490 processed here. So if we go back to our campaign, we should have 490 contacts in our campaign with 490 responses, because that's our actual goal. Ah, we have 3 extra. I need to figure out where those extra 3 come from. But at least everybody responded. So, in short, that's the demo. There are a few situations that we can improve, of course. If we look at the invalid email address, we do have a formula. Email is valid email, so there is a way to validate this data. So we could do, sorry, I don't need a formula. So you could build in a validation rule here, or a validate rule, that if it's not a valid email, you discard it, or you give it an error, or based on the errors, it gives you incentive to improve your recipe for future runs. Any questions so far?
No, there aren't any questions, but feel free to post them in the Q&A section.
So thank you, Martijn, for this concise intro and for the great demo. So small comment from my side. This is good to see it done in a calm way and not in the rush of a demo jam. It's much more educational if you can follow along, right? And yeah, let's open the Q&A, and back to you, Jonas.
Yeah, still don't see any questions.
Do you yourself have a question, Jonas?
Not at the moment.
Yeah. Rodrigo?
Everything's fine on my end.
I've got a question, Martijn.
Sure.
You mentioned at the beginning of the demo that, or at least I think I saw that on the first slides, that you can migrate data, or if you're doing like org migrations.
Yeah.
How extensive do you do, literally just to replicate like a partial copy sandbox or a full copy sandbox, or
you can basically do,
yeah?
you can do whatever you want, and there are multiple ways to do it. Before we had connected systems, I would just export. You could use the Salesforce data export, for example. You just select all the objects you want to export. They will provide you with a CSV file that you can use to create a recipe and get any data that you want. So, for example, if you only need 33% of the contacts, because I can imagine that you don't want all your contacts from production into your org, it's formulas. So, and this one is a little bit extensive, but basically, if either this or this, then we're going to discard it. So we give a random number, and if it's greater than 33%, we'll keep it. So there are ways to get rid of data. There are ways to anonymize data. So you can do that same thing. So if we take this, let's say we have our contacts with first name, last name, email address that we use here, but it's an export from production. Then what you can do is not even import the first name and the last name, but instead of using the proper one, that's why we've built this in, you can use a random first name. And this is just a built-in functionality, and it will give you a random first name. So you still have all your other data from the contact, so the relation to opportunities, to accounts, etc. But the actual person identifying information you can get rid of. So it's kind of data masking. And we do, I'm not sure if I build it in this org. This is still, as in technically it works, and we are improving to build wizards for this as well. We have connected systems, so all you need to do is create a connected app in your source org, where we want to connect to from this org. In this case, it's our PBO, partner business org. And we create a recipe job of type query. Connected system will be a Salesforce system. If we go into a connected system, it's not that much. It's just type Salesforce with a consumer key and your secret key from the connected app settings, and make sure you have the right host. And here you can enter your query. And what it will do is when you hit run now, and this is what we need to improve. I'm not going to do that now, but what it will do is it will connect to the org, perform this query, get the results in CSV file, create a bread, because here you can enter the recipe name that needs to be executed when the data comes in. Discard the changes. And I only have a random, I have an invalid recipe. But we do have the query result, so no previews available, unfortunately. So what is in here is the results of the query that was executed in the other org. So ID and name from account.
Okay. And I'm assuming then that you would create your, now I didn't store all of the different terminologies, but your different breads or your different slices. So theoretically, if I was situation I'm presently in at the moment, we are going to bin our old org. We're building a new one, and we will be selecting a subset of data that we would want to put into the new org. Less fields, mappings, all of that type of thing you would put into your slices.
Yeah. Well, in the recipe, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And since this is recorded, I cannot I cannot show it to you. But that is exactly what I'm building at the moment for one of our customers. They have an old org. They're going into a new one, and all accounts need to be moved over, and the same for contacts. So what we do is we created a query that contains all the fields in the old org, so we get all the data over. But in the recipe, when you create the recipe and you do the CSV import, just like we did just now. Let me give you an example. Here we go. There will be a lot of fields that you don't need, like last viewed date, maybe last modified date, created by, all these system fields. So you can just go through and select, I don't need all of these. We don't want to import those. We're not going to use it. So you make your selection here. But in the end, you determine what you actually load into the database.
Okay, and you can map the fields, say it's called bread on the one side and butter on the other side, but you want the input to land there, then you can map it that way.
Yeah.
Right.
A way to do it, so that is something which will be my task for tonight, actually, is get all the activities over. And the issue with activities is they are attached to custom objects, and the custom object prefixes are different between the two orgs, and the names are different. So what is called, let's say, baggage in the old org is luggage, is the object luggage in the new one, and we need to tie those two together. So what I did is I created a recipe that exports all the record prefixes from the old org, and I just loaded them into the new org, so I can do a mapping. So whenever I get a record ID, because you will probably know every account record starts with 001. So that way I can identify a record from the old org, let's say the who ID or the what ID. I go into my mapping table that I saved, actually stored in Salesforce, and find that record prefix. Then I find the object name of the object that we are using in the new org, and that's where I base my query on. So every now and then, you do have to get a few steps in between, or need multiple recipes to do things, but basically everything is possible.
Okay. Can you also handle So our old org has single contacts on multiple, so you would have duplicates of contacts, each account, if that person exists in account A, account B, account C. And if we want to convert in the new org to have one contact with multiple relationships, is that also something the tool could do?
Yeah, because basically for every contact and account combination, you can create account contact relationship record. Yeah. Maybe you need a few steps, but definitely doable.
Cool, thanks.
Does anybody else have a question before I go? Yeah, so again, thank you, Martijn. We will like to keep to the 1 hour. But what I can see here is that there's quite an interest in more advanced use cases. So as we discussed earlier, it might be nice to set up another session in which we go more into detail. And I would be happy to do so. At very high level, I think one important keyword is, if nobody takes it amiss, maturity. So at the initial You're Dreaming there was a great presentation, I think, from Copado, where they distinguished 5 maturity levels, and then they kindly explained where you might find yourself. So if you are using data loader or VLOOKUPs and stuff, you would maybe be at maturity level 1.
Yeah.
And if you use some very complicated ETL from IBM or so, you might be at 4. And I'm not saying where Sliced Bread would be. For me, it would be like a 5. But it doesn't do everything that other ETLs maybe do. But let's not get there. So what I'm saying is that it could be interesting for people to recognize how they can go from their current state to using Sliced Bread ETL with like a path that they can traverse each of them.
Yeah. Well, speaking about maturity, we are maturing ourselves. We recently introduced the connected system. So, like I said, technically it works. We know we can still improve on user experience there because we always want to make it as easy as possible for users. For now, we've connected Salesforce, AWS, and FTP and SFTP servers. But we're also considering Google Drive, SharePoint, etc. So you can just take your files from that location and have them processed automatically. Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah,
it's never done. This is never done.
Thank you, Martijn. So you showed us how easy it is to install the app. Then if somebody really thinks further about that, I think the next big question is licenses. Could you give us a brief reminder of your license model? I think that's an important takeaway for everyone.
Yeah, so licensing and therefore related to it, pricing is always a nice discussion. But it's a site-wide license, so we don't require user seats. And why is that? Because the breads and the slices are records in Salesforce, which means you can add them to your automation tools, your existing automation tools. You can create a bread via Flow and start it, for example. So we never know who will be using Sliced Bread. So we're not limiting it to certain users. It's a site-wide license, and the pricing model is based on the number of active Salesforce licenses in your org. So just the Salesforce licenses, no platform licenses or other feature licenses. And that is because the more users you have in your org, in general, the more data you're processing, and the more costs we have of supporting that. Next to that, we do have special pricing for consultants or consulting companies. So if you want to have a single license where you can just use license, let's say you're a freelancer and you want to use it, we have a very reduced pricing. Contact me. And we have the same for ISV companies, because one of our biggest customers is actually an ISV company that uses Sliced Bread to manage all of their customers. So there's a special pricing model for that as well. And then we're talking about org bundles, and I don't want to get into too many details, but that's in short, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Martijn, for being a great speaker, for enlightening us on your excellent product, which is going to be developed further. Thanks to all attendees. Thanks to Jonas for moderating. And especially thanks to Sarah and the Frankfurt User Group for co-hosting. Sarah, you have the last word, maybe.
I'd also like to thank you. It was very enlightening. I think majority of us have all faced the challenges of creating data in New York's in multiple data loader files and hitting barriers. So it's a very interesting tool. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thanks, Renee, as well, for inviting us along.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a nice day, nice evening. Bye.
Bye.